I'm sitting here on my wooden deck at 6 in the morning, still wearing my cherry red housecoat, and there's a stack of bills held together with a rubber band just staring at me from the kitchen table inside. The summer heat hasn't even kicked in yet, but I can already feel it coming. That heavy, slow Detroit heat that makes the fans spin all day and everything move like molasses. And I'm thinking about what he said to me that day. If I went on that beach trip with my sister, he said I'd regret it. God, he meant every single word. You know what the worst part is? When someone you've spent your whole life trusting looks you dead in the eye and threatens you so calmly it sounds like love. That's what it was like. Not screaming, not violence, just this cold, measured warning that made my stomach drop because I knew, somewhere deep down, that he wasn't bluffing. I need to tell you this story, not because I want sympathy, not because I'm looking for validation, but because right now, somewhere, someone is sitting exactly where I sat 3 years ago, making excuses for someone who doesn't deserve them, and I need that person to know they're not crazy. They're not overreacting. And they're definitely not alone. If this story helps even one person see what I couldn't see for so long, then sharing it is worth it. So please, if you're listening and something in your gut is telling you this sounds familiar, stay with me. Hit that like button so this reaches someone else who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this journey, because what I'm about to tell you might just save someone's life. I live in a mobile home in a quiet park near downtown Detroit. It's in one of those mixed-income neighborhoods where everyone knows everyone, where the houses are older, but people take pride in keeping their little patches of grass mowed and their porches swept. My mobile home isn't much, but it's mine. Or at least, I thought it was mine. The wooden deck out back is where I do my thinking, where I used to sit every evening with the phone pressed to my ear, talking to my sister until the sky went dark. That morning I'm telling you about, I was sorting through a pile of mail I'd been avoiding for weeks. Maybe months, if I'm being honest. Bills, notices, things with red stamps that said final or urgent. I kept them all together with that rubber band. Like, if I could just contain them physically, I could contain the problem itself. The cherry red housecoat I was wearing was the one bright spot in my life back then. It was the only thing that made me feel alive, like I was still a person who deserved color, who deserved to feel good about herself even for a second. The mail pile had grown so tall it was almost comical. Electric bills, water bills, credit card statements for cards I didn't remember opening, medical bills for appointments I didn't remember scheduling. And there, at the bottom, a letter from a resort, a beach resort, thanking me for my recent stay and hoping I'd visit again soon. I hadn't been to any beach resort. The fan was already spinning above me even though it was barely dawn. That's how summers are here. The heat starts early, and it doesn't let up until October if you're lucky. I could smell the neighbor's coffee brewing through her window. I could hear the distant rumble of trucks heading downtown for the early shift. Everything was so normal, so everyday. And yet, I was holding this letter in my hands and feeling like the ground was opening up underneath me. I turned the letter over in my hands, reading it again and again, as if the words might change if I looked at them enough times. The resort was in Florida, a luxury property right on the ocean. The kind of place with valet parking and infinity pools and restaurants that don't list prices on the menu. The kind of place I'd never been able to afford, even in my dreams. The letter thanked me by name, my full legal name. It mentioned specific dates from just 2 months earlier. Dates when I'd been working double shifts at the hospital, trying to scrape together enough money to pay the water bill that was already 3 months overdue. I called my sister that evening like I always did. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did, and I could hear her kids in the background fighting over something trivial. For a moment, I just wanted to talk about normal things. Her kids, her job, the weather, anything but this. But instead I said, "Did I tell you I went on a beach trip recently?" There was a pause, a long one. Then she said, "No. When did you go?" "I didn't," I said. My voice sounded strange even to me. Flat, disconnected. But someone used my credit card at a beach resort. A nice one, apparently. They're thanking me for my stay. Another pause, this one even longer. Then she said the words that would become a refrain for the next 2 years. "You need to check your bank account. Right now." I told her I would. I told her I was sure it was just a mistake. I told her a lot of things that night that I didn't believe. Not really. But saying them out loud made me feel like I still had some control over the situation. Like if I could just keep my voice steady and my explanations reasonable, reality would bend to match them. "Listen to me," she said, and her voice had that edge to it, that big sister tone that meant she was about to tell me something I didn't want to hear. "I know you don't want to look. I know you're scared, but you need to know what's happening. You can't fix something you won't look at." I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to tell her she was being dramatic, that she'd never liked him anyway, that she was seeing problems where there weren't any. But the words wouldn't come, because somewhere deep down, in that place where I'd been shoving uncomfortable truths for years, I knew she was right. After we hung up, I sat on that deck for another hour, watching the sky turn from pink to purple to black. The stack of bills sat inside on the kitchen table, held together with that rubber band. Waiting. Always waiting. I didn't check my bank account that night. I was too afraid of what I'd find. Let me take you back. Let me show you how I got here, because it didn't start with beach resorts and stolen credit cards. It started years before that, with something much quieter, much more insidious. I met him when I was 22. He was older, established, confident in a way I'd never been. He had a good job, a nice car, plans for the future. I was working 2 jobs just to keep my head above water, living in a tiny apartment with a roommate who never cleaned, and walls so thin I could hear every argument in the building. He was different from anyone I'd ever dated. He opened doors for me. He paid for dinners at restaurants where I'd never been able to afford to eat. He talked about retirement accounts and investment portfolios and 5-year plans with the kind of certainty that made me feel safe. Like someone finally had a map for how life was supposed to work. When he told me he loved me, I believed him. When he told me he wanted to take care of me, I believed that too. And when we got married 2 years later, I thought I'd finally found the thing everyone talks about: security, partnership, home. My sister didn't come to the wedding. She said she had a bad feeling. She said something was off about him, about the way he talked, about the way he looked at me. "He talks about you like you're a project," she'd said when I called to tell her about the engagement. Not a person, a project, something to manage and fix and control. I'd been furious with her. How dare she try to ruin the happiest moment of my life? How dare she act like she knew him better than I did? I was 24 and in love and convinced that she was just jealous or overprotective or didn't understand. I forgave her for missing the wedding. I forgave him for the small cruelties that started appearing in our marriage like cracks in a foundation. The way he'd criticize what I wore, the way he'd sigh when I talked about my day, the way he'd make decisions without asking me, then act surprised when I was upset. Because that's what I did. I forgave. Over and over and over again. I believed in forgiveness like it was a religion. Maybe it was my actual religion bleeding over into everything else. I kept my Sunday church hat in a special box in the closet, wrapped in tissue paper, only taking it out for services. Church taught me that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water, that you stand by your people no matter what. So, I stood by him. The sacrifices started small. He needed money for a business opportunity, so I gave him access to my savings. He needed me to work extra hours so he could take time off to pursue his dreams, so I did. He needed me to cancel plans with my sister so I could attend his work events, so I canceled. Years went by like that. Years of me giving and him taking, and me telling myself it was normal. It was marriage. It was what you did for someone you loved. I gave up my evenings. I gave up my hobbies. I gave up the part of myself that used to make banana pudding in a glass dish just because I liked the way it looked on the counter, the way it made the house feel lived in and loved. I stopped doing things that brought me joy because there was never time, never money, never energy left over after taking care of everything else. My sister kept calling every evening. God bless her, she never stopped trying. And every evening I'd tell her I was fine. Everything was fine. He was just stressed with work. I was just tired. It was just a rough patch. She'd ask me about my hobbies. What happened to that thing I used to do? That thing I loved? And I'd make excuses. I'd change the subject. I'd tell her about his life instead of mine, because somewhere along the way, his life had become my life, and I'd stopped existing as a separate person. The bills started piling up around year 7 of our marriage. At first, it was just 1 or 2 that I couldn't quite cover. Then it was 5 or 6. Then it was a stack held together with a rubber band because I couldn't bear to look at them individually. He told me it was my fault we were in debt. I didn't manage money well. I spent too much on groceries. I didn't work hard enough. And I believed him, because by that point, I'd been trained to believe him about everything. "Look at this," he'd say, holding up a grocery receipt like it was evidence in a trial. $42 for 1 trip to the store. "What are you buying, caviar?" He'd laugh when he said it, but there was no warmth in the sound, just contempt wrapped in humor, so I couldn't quite call it what it was. I started shopping at discount stores. I started buying generic brands. I started skipping meals myself so the grocery bill would be lower. And still, somehow, we never had enough money. Still, somehow, the bills kept piling up. When he suggested I sign some papers to make managing our finances easier, I didn't question it. When he said power of attorney would streamline things, make it simpler for him to handle the bills while I focused on work, I just nodded and signed where he told me to sign. I remember thinking, this is what trust looks like. This is what partnership looks like. I remember the pen in my hand feeling heavy. I remember him smiling at me afterward, kissing my forehead, telling me I'd made things so much easier for both of us. I remember feeling proud that I'd done something to help. That night, I made banana pudding for the first time in months. I put it in the glass dish, the one I'd gotten as a wedding present, and I felt like maybe things were turning around. Maybe this was the beginning of a better phase. I called my sister and told her about the papers I'd signed, about how relieved I felt that someone else was handling the financial stress, about how maybe I'd been wrong to worry so much. There was silence on her end. Then she said very quietly, "What kind of papers?" "Power of attorney," I said, "so he can manage the accounts while I'm at work." More silence. Then, "You gave him power of attorney over your accounts?" "Our accounts," I corrected. "We're married." "No," she said, and her voice had an edge to it I'd never heard before. "Your accounts, the ones that were yours before you met him, the ones with your name on them." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "It's fine," I said. "He's my husband." "Promise me you'll check those accounts," she said. "Promise me you'll look at the statements." I promised, but I didn't look. Not that week, not the next week, not for 6 months after that conversation, because I was afraid. And when you're afraid of what you'll find, it's easier to just not look at all. The summer heat that year was unbearable. The kind of heat that makes you move in slow motion, that makes everything feel like you're underwater. The fan spun constantly, pushing around hot air that smelled like cut grass and exhaust fumes, and something else, something stale and wrong that I couldn't quite identify. I was avoiding more than just the mail by that point. I was avoiding my sister's calls. I was avoiding conversations with coworkers who asked me how I was doing. I was avoiding mirrors because I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me anymore. She looked tired. She looked small. She looked like someone who'd been slowly disappearing for years and was finally almost gone. The loneliness was crushing. It sounds strange to say you can be lonely in a marriage, but that's exactly what it was. He was there physically, but absent in every way that mattered. And I'd pushed away everyone else who might have filled that void. My birthday came and went without acknowledgement. I got sick with the flu and lay in bed for 3 days, and he complained that I wasn't cooking dinner. I made banana pudding one evening, hoping it might spark some warmth, some memory of better times, and he didn't even notice it sitting there on the counter. The stack of bills grew taller. The rubber band holding them together started to wear thin, leaving marks on the envelopes like scars. And then came the beach trip conversation. My sister had been planning it for months. Just the 2 of us, a long weekend at a beach resort in South Carolina. She'd already paid for everything, told me all I had to do was show up. She said I needed it. She said I looked like I was barely holding on. She said she was worried about me. "I'm not worried," she'd said on the phone. "I'm terrified. You sound like a ghost of yourself. When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to? When's the last time you laughed?" I couldn't remember. I genuinely couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed. Not a polite chuckle or a nervous giggle, but a real deep belly laugh that made your sides hurt. It had been years, maybe since before the wedding. I wanted to go so badly it physically hurt. When I mentioned it to him, his face went completely still. Not angry, just still, like a lake before a storm. "If you go on that trip," he said slowly, carefully, "you'll regret it." I laughed. I actually laughed because surely he was joking. Surely he wasn't threatening me over a weekend with my sister. But he wasn't laughing. He was just looking at me with those cold, flat eyes, and I realized he meant every word. "It's just a weekend," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "You'll regret it," he repeated. The way he said it made my blood run cold. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain, like he was telling me a fact about the future that he already knew. I didn't go on the trip. I called my sister and made up an excuse about work, about money, about a dozen things that weren't the real reason. She knew I was lying. I knew she knew, but neither of us said it out loud. "He told you not to go, didn't he?" she said finally, after I'd run through all my excuses. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. "One day," she said, and her voice was thick with tears, "one day you're going to wake up and realize how much of yourself you've given away, and I just hope it's not too late when that happens." That's when the worst of it started, the microaggressions, the tiny daily cruelties that add up to something unbearable. He stopped speaking to me for days at a time, not because we'd fought, just because he could, just because silence was a weapon and he knew how to wield it. He'd walk past me like I wasn't there. He'd make plans without telling me. He'd eat the food I'd cooked without acknowledging I'd made it. He'd come and go from the house at strange hours, and when I'd ask where he'd been, he'd look at me like I was crazy for even wondering. The bills kept coming, the notices got more urgent, and I kept shoving them in that stack, kept putting that rubber band around them, kept pretending if I didn't open them, they couldn't hurt me. I stopped talking to my sister every evening. I stopped answering when she called. I stopped existing, really, except as this ghost moving through a mobile home that didn't feel like mine anymore, wearing a cherry red housecoat that felt like a costume, a desperate attempt to convince myself I was still alive. Then came the day that changed everything. I was at the bank trying to withdraw money for groceries, just $40. That's all I needed, $40 to buy food for the week. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes and pressed clothes, looked at her screen and frowned. She looked at me. She looked at the screen again. Then she called over a manager. They spoke in hushed voices. They kept glancing at me, and I stood there in my work clothes, clutching my purse, feeling that familiar dread building in my chest. Finally, the manager came over. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She asked me to step into a private office. The office was small and windowless, with generic motivational posters on the walls about teamwork and success. It smelled like coffee and copy paper and the artificial lemon scent of cleaning products. I sat in a chair across from her desk and felt like I was about to be fired from my own life. "Ma'am," she said once we were seated, "I need to ask you something. Do you know who has power of attorney over this account?" "My husband," I said. "Is something wrong?" She looked at me for a long moment. There was something in her expression that made me want to cry, something like pity mixed with anger, mixed with a recognition I didn't understand yet. "Ma'am," she said gently, "someone has been making significant withdrawals from your account. Large amounts. For months now. Has he been making these withdrawals?" The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. "What kind of amounts?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me. I saw numbers that didn't make sense. Hundreds of dollars at a time. Sometimes thousands. Charges at hotels. Charges at restaurants. Airline tickets. Car payments. "There's a note here that these funds were authorized by the power of attorney holder," she continued. "That's why the withdrawals went through. But I have to ask, were you aware of these transactions?" I wasn't aware. I had no idea. All this time, I'd been struggling to pay the electric bill, to buy groceries, to keep us afloat, and he'd been spending thousands of dollars on things I knew nothing about. "The car payments?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What car?" She clicked a few things. "A Porsche Cayenne, ocean blue." I thought about his new car, the one he said was a lease through his company, the one I'd never questioned because why would I question my own husband? I don't understand, I said, but that was a lie. I understood perfectly. I just didn't want to. The bank manager looked at me with those eyes full of pity and anger and something else, something I'd later recognize as recognition, like she'd seen this before, like she knew exactly what she was looking at. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "someone has been taking advantage of you." And in that moment, sitting in that small office in a bank in Detroit, Michigan, looking at a computer screen full of evidence of my own blindness, I saw myself through her eyes. I saw a woman who'd signed away her own protection, a woman who'd been systematically drained of resources and dignity and hope, a woman who'd made excuses for years because facing the truth was too terrifying. I saw someone who'd been tricked, used, betrayed by the one person who was supposed to protect her. The collapse didn't come all at once. It came in waves. First in that office, where I had to excuse myself to the bathroom so I could cry without witnesses. Then in my car in the parking lot, where I sat for an hour unable to drive because my hands were shaking too badly. Then at home that evening, where I stood in front of the mirror in my cherry red housecoat and didn't recognize the person looking back. That stack of bills sat on the kitchen table. I picked it up. I pulled off the rubber band. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I opened them. Every single one was worse than I'd imagined. Collections, notices, final warnings, threats of legal action, and all of it, every bit of it, while he was spending thousands on beach resorts and Porsches and God knows what else. I called my sister. It was almost midnight, but I called anyway. She answered on the first ring. "He took everything," I said. And then I started crying so hard I couldn't speak. She didn't say "I told you so." She didn't say anything except, "I'm coming over." She showed up at my door an hour later with banana pudding in a glass dish because she remembered it used to be my favorite. We sat on my wooden deck in the summer heat with the fan spinning inside, and she just held my hand while I cried. "What do?" I asked her. "You fight back," she said. "You become your own detective, your own advocate. You get proof and you get help and you get out." So that's what I did. I started pulling documents, bank statements going back years, credit card bills, loan applications I'd never seen. I wrote everything down. I took photos of everything. I made copies and hid them in places he'd never think to look. I bought a cheap scanner at Walmart and spent hours in my bedroom with the door locked, scanning every document I could find. I created folders on my computer with innocuous names like recipes and church programs and filled them with evidence. I bought a flash drive that I kept hidden in the bottom of my makeup bag, backed up and ready to grab if I needed to leave quickly. The investigation became my full-time second job. I'd come home from my shift at the hospital, exhausted and aching, and instead of resting, I'd sit at my computer for hours, cross-referencing bank statements with calendar dates. I created timelines. I made notes about patterns I noticed. Every Friday afternoon, like clockwork, there'd be a withdrawal of exactly $300 from an ATM across town, in a neighborhood I'd never been to. Every third Saturday of the month, a restaurant charge at a steakhouse that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. I started paying attention to his schedule in ways I never had before. When he said he had a late meeting, I'd note the time he left and the time he came home. When he said he was visiting his mother, I'd check the mileage on his car. I felt like I was going crazy, like I'd become paranoid and obsessive, but the numbers didn't lie. The evidence kept mounting. I discovered things that made me physically sick. He'd opened credit cards in my name. He'd taken out loans against our home. He'd been living a completely separate life funded entirely by money that was supposed to be ours. But really, it was mine. Money I'd earned. Money I'd saved before I ever met him. One night, while he was out at what he said was a work dinner, I found a shoebox in the back of his closet. Inside were receipts. Hundreds of them. Receipts from jewelry stores for items I'd never received. Receipts from lingerie boutiques for sizes that weren't mine. Receipts from restaurants on dates when he'd told me he was working late and I'd eaten canned soup alone on the deck. I sat on the closet floor with that box in my lap and cried so hard, I thought I might throw up. Not just because of what he'd done, but because of how stupid I felt for not seeing it sooner, for believing every lie, for making excuses when the truth was sitting right there in a shoebox in his closet the whole time. The beach resort charges, there were dozens of them. Different resorts, different states. Always when he'd told me he was away on business. The car payments? For a Porsche, he was driving around town while I was taking the bus to save money on gas. The hotel charges? Places I'd never been, with dates that corresponded to weekends he'd said he was visiting his mother. Every discovery was another crack in the foundation of everything I'd believed about my marriage, about him, about myself. And with each crack, something else started to emerge, something I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten it existed. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold, calculated kind. The kind that makes you methodical. The kind that makes you dangerous. I became my own detective, like my sister said. I tracked every transaction. I made spreadsheets. I documented patterns. And when I had enough evidence to fill a 3-ring binder, I made an appointment with a lawyer. The lawyer was a woman about my age who worked out of a small office near downtown. Her name was Patricia, and she had a poster on her wall that said, "Nevertheless, she persisted." She listened to my story without interrupting. She looked through my documentation. And when I finished, she said something I'll never forget. "You're not the first woman to sit in that chair and tell me this story, and you won't be the last. But you're here now, and that's what matters. Are you ready to fight?" I thought about the stack of bills. I thought about the cherry red housecoat that used to make me feel alive. I thought about my sister bringing me banana pudding at midnight. I thought about years of phone calls where I'd lied about being fine. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." We filed complaints with the bank. We filed a police report. We started the process of revoking his power of attorney and freezing accounts. We documented everything for what the lawyer said would likely become a divorce proceeding. It was terrifying. Every step of it was terrifying. Because I was going against someone I'd spent 12 years of my life with, someone who knew all my weaknesses, someone who'd already proven he was willing to destroy me financially. But I did it anyway. The first thing I did after filing those initial complaints was open my own bank account. Just my name, no one else's. The bank manager who'd first shown me the truth helped me set it up. She made sure it was completely separate, completely protected. When I walked out of that bank with my own debit card in my wallet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. It was just a small piece of plastic, but it represented something bigger. It represented autonomy, choice, the ability to make decisions about my own life without someone else's permission. I went home that day and I made banana pudding in my glass dish. I sat on my wooden deck in my cherry red housecoat with the fan spinning inside and the summer heat pressing down like a weight, and I ate that entire dish of pudding by myself without sharing it with anyone. It was one of the best meals of my life. But fighting back wasn't simple. It wasn't neat. It didn't happen in a straight line. Because he was still there, still in the house, still pretending nothing had changed while lawyers and banks and police worked behind the scenes. He tried everything. He tried charm first, the way he always did. Flowers, apologies, promises that things would be different. He brought home roses one evening, the expensive kind from the florist downtown, and set them on the kitchen counter like they could erase years of theft and lies. "I know things have been hard," he said, his voice soft and reasonable. "But we can work through this. We're a team. We've always been a team." I looked at those roses and thought about how much they probably cost. Thought about how that money came from my account. My money, buying flowers to manipulate me into staying silent about the fact that he'd been stealing from me. "How much did those cost?" I asked. He looked confused. "What? The roses. How much did they cost?" "I don't know. $40? Why does it matter?" "Because that $40 came from my account," I said. "You're using my money to buy me gifts, so I'll forgive you for stealing my money. Do you see how insane that is?" When that didn't work, he tried anger, yelling, accusations, making me feel crazy for questioning him. One night he stood in the kitchen, his face red with rage, and shouted at me for 20 minutes straight. I was ungrateful. I was paranoid. I was listening to my sister who'd always hated him. I was destroying our marriage over nothing. The bank had made mistakes. The credit cards were fraudulent. Someone must have stolen my identity. None of it was his fault. All of it was my fault for not trusting him. I stood there and let him yell. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just waited for him to finish, and when he did, I said, "I have copies of everything, every transaction, every lie, and my lawyer has copies too. So you can yell all you want, but it won't change the evidence." He went very quiet then, and I saw something flicker across his face. Fear, maybe, or just the realization that for the first time in 12 years, his manipulation wasn't working. When that didn't work, he tried manipulation. He cried. He told me he'd made mistakes, but he loved me. He told me I was overreacting. He told me the lawyer was putting ideas in my head. "I have a problem," he said one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. "I know I have a problem, but I need help, not punishment. If you really loved me, you'd help me get better instead of trying to destroy me." And for a moment, just a moment, I felt that old instinct kick in. The instinct to forgive, to fix, to sacrifice myself to make someone else's life easier. But then I thought about the shoebox of receipts, the jewelry I'd never received, the beach resorts I'd never visited, the years of struggling while he lived like a king on my money. "I did love you," I said. "I loved you for 12 years, and you used that love to rob me blind. So, no, I'm not helping you anymore. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." And when none of that worked, he tried threats. "If you keep pushing this," he said one evening, standing in the doorway while I made dinner, "you'll lose everything. I'll make sure of it." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I saw someone I didn't recognize. Or maybe I saw him clearly for the first time. This man who'd tricked me into signing away my protection, who'd stolen from me for years while I struggled to buy groceries, who'd threatened me when I'd wanted to spend a weekend with my sister. "I've already lost everything," I said. My voice was steady, calm. "You made sure of that. But I'm getting it back now. One piece at a time." He left the house that night and didn't come back for 3 days. My family started choosing sides. His relatives called me, texting me, showing up at my door. They accused me of being vindictive, of trying to destroy him, of making false accusations. When I showed them the documentation, some of them went silent. Some of them doubled down. One cousin told me I should forgive him. That marriage means standing by your spouse no matter what. I thought about that word. Forgiveness. The thing I'd built my whole identity around. The thing I'd used as a weapon against myself for years. "I forgave him for 12 years, I said to that cousin. And he used every single one of those years to steal from me. So no, I'm done forgiving. Now I'm protecting myself. My sister was my anchor through all of it. She came over almost every evening like we were kids again, and we'd sit on the deck and talk until the sky went dark. She never said I told you so, even though she would have had every right. She just kept showing up, kept bringing me banana pudding, kept reminding me that I wasn't crazy, wasn't vindictive, wasn't wrong. "You're doing the right thing," she'd say, even when it doesn't feel like it. The legal process moved slowly. Investigations take time. Building a case takes time. But piece by piece, the truth came out. The bank froze his access to my accounts. The police opened an investigation into financial fraud. My lawyer filed for legal separation and started the process of untangling 12 years of financial abuse. And through it all, I kept working, kept paying bills, kept showing up to my life even when every part of me wanted to disappear. The confrontation came at his mother's birthday party. She'd insisted I come, said it was a family event, and I was still family. I didn't want to go. My lawyer advised against it. But something in me needed to face them all, needed to look them in the eye and tell the truth. The morning of the party, I stood in front of my closet trying to decide what to wear. My sister called while I was standing there. "You don't have to go," she said. "You don't owe them anything." "I know," I said, "but I need to do this. For me." "Then wear the house coat," she said. I laughed. "To a birthday party? Why not? You've spent 12 years dressing the way he wanted, acting the way he wanted, being who he wanted. Wear the damn house coat. Show them who you really are." So I did. I walked into that house wearing my cherry red house coat because I'd stopped caring about impressing anyone. My sister came with me. Her presence beside me felt like armor. The room went quiet when we walked in. 20, maybe 30 people, all staring at me in my bright red housecoat like I'd shown up in a clown costume. His mother approached us first, her face tight with disapproval. "I'm glad you came," she said, though her voice suggested otherwise. "Though I wish you'd dressed more appropriately." "I'm dressed exactly how I want to be dressed," I said, "and I have something to say to everyone here." I didn't wait for permission. I walked into the center of that living room full of people I'd known for over a decade, people who'd watched me sacrifice and struggle and slowly disappear, and I told them everything. I told them about the power of attorney I'd been tricked into signing, about the withdrawals I'd never authorized, about the beach resorts and the Porsche and the years of lies. I told them about the bills I couldn't pay while he was spending thousands on himself, about the threats, about being told I'd regret trying to have one weekend with my sister. Some of them believed me, some of them didn't. But I didn't care anymore. I wasn't there for their approval. I was there for me, to reclaim my voice, to stop being silent about what had been done to me. He stood in the corner, silent, his face blank. He didn't defend himself. He didn't deny anything. He just watched me. And I wondered if he'd ever actually seen me at all, or if I'd just been a resource to him from the very beginning. I pulled out my phone. I showed them the documentation, the bank statements, the credit card bills, everything I'd gathered over months of being my own detective. And then I said the words that had been building in me for 12 years. I will no longer pay for love. I will no longer buy affection with my own destruction. You either respect me or you lose me. There is no third option anymore. I walked out of that house with my sister beside me. We got in her car and drove back to my mobile home in silence. When we got there, we sat on the deck in the summer heat, and she said, "I'm proud of you." I cried then. Not sad tears. Something else. Relief, maybe. Or just the release of finally standing up for myself. But the story doesn't end there. Because 2 weeks later, I got a call from my lawyer. She had news. His employer had found out about the investigation, about the charges, about what he'd been doing with company resources, because apparently I wasn't the only person he'd been stealing from. And they'd fired him, not just fired. They'd terminated him for cause and were pursuing their own legal action. He'd lost his professional license, his reputation, his income. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me just felt tired. Because even though he'd gotten what he deserved, it didn't undo the damage. It didn't give me back the years I'd lost, or the money he'd stolen, or the version of myself I'd been before I met him. But it was justice. External justice. The kind that comes from the world recognizing what was done and responding accordingly. And that mattered. I started going to therapy. I started building a new life that was actually mine. I started doing things I'd given up years ago. Simple things like making banana pudding whenever I wanted, like wearing my cherry red housecoat without feeling like I had to justify taking up space. I started talking to my sister every evening again, not out of desperation, but out of love. Real love. The kind that doesn't ask for anything except that you show up honestly. And I started building a chosen family. Friends from work who became closer than relatives, women from my neighborhood who'd noticed I'd been struggling and reached out. My sister's kids who called me aunt and actually meant it. These people weren't connected to me by blood. They were connected to me by choice, by genuine affection, by the kind of respect that doesn't come with conditions or costs. I sold the mobile home. I couldn't stay there anymore, not after everything. Every corner held memories of who I'd been when I was disappearing. The wooden deck where I'd sat avoiding bills. The kitchen where I'd made banana pudding hoping to save a marriage that had been dead for years. The bedroom where I'd cried myself to sleep more nights than I could count. I moved into a small apartment in a better part of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Just mine. No one else's name on the lease, no one else's furniture or dishes or rules. I hung my Sunday church hat on the wall as art, next to the glass dish I'd kept from the old house, reminders of who I'd been and who I was becoming. I started dreaming about the future for the first time in over a decade. I started looking at senior communities, places with activities and people my age, people who'd lived through things and understood the cost of survival, places where I could build the kind of life I'd always deserved. I started saving money again, my own money, in my own account, that no one could touch without my permission. It wasn't easy. Some days I woke up and felt the weight of everything that had been taken from me, and I wanted to give up. Some days I saw him around town, driving that ocean blue Porsche, and I felt rage so intense it made my hands shake. But I kept going. I kept showing up to my own life. I kept building something new from the ruins of what had been destroyed. And slowly, day by day, I became someone I recognized again. It's been 3 years now since that morning on my wooden deck, since I finally opened that stack of bills and started facing the truth. 3 years since I became my own detective and advocate. 3 years since I filed those first complaints and opened my own bank account. The divorce is final. The legal cases are settled. He's gone from my life, except as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you love someone more than you love yourself. I still live in Detroit, still in that mixed-income neighborhood where everyone knows everyone. But now, when people see me, they don't see someone disappearing. They see someone who fought back, someone who survived. I still talk to my sister every evening. We still laugh about banana pudding. We finally took that beach trip we'd planned 3 years ago, and I stood on that beach feeling the sun on my face and the sand under my feet, and I thought, this is what freedom feels like. I still wear my cherry red housecoat, but now it actually makes me feel alive again. Now it's not a costume. It's just me. The stack of bills is gone. Not because someone else is handling them, but because I handle them now. Me. One bill at a time, in my own name, with my own money. And I learned something through all of this that I want to share with you. Because if you're listening to this story, and something in your gut is telling you it sounds familiar, you need to hear this. I learned that I wasn't alone. That what happened to me happens to more people than anyone wants to admit. Studies show that about 5% of seniors suffer physical abuse, and honestly, I think the numbers are even higher when you include financial abuse like what happened to me. And even more shocking, a 2012 study revealed that 1 in 4 nursing home residents suffered physical abuse. 1 in 4. That's not a small number, that's a crisis. That means most people going through this are suffering in silence, just like I did for so long, making excuses, believing in forgiveness to the point of self-destruction, thinking that if they just try harder, love more, sacrifice more, things will get better. But here's what I learned that changed everything. It wasn't my fault. None of it was my fault. Signing those papers wasn't naivety. It was trust. Trust that was deliberately exploited by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And if you're in this situation right now, if you're reading this and thinking about someone in your life who has power over you that they shouldn't have, who makes you feel small, who takes from you without giving back, who threatens you when you try to have your own life, you need to know something. It's not your fault. And there's a way out. You need to start recognizing the signs. The isolation, the financial control, the way they make you doubt your own perceptions, the way they twist your beliefs about family and forgiveness and loyalty into weapons against you. You need to become your own detective. Start documenting everything. Take photos, make copies, write things down. Build your case before you make your move, because if someone is willing to abuse your trust this way, they'll fight dirty when you try to leave. You need to find your ally, whether it's a sister, a friend, a bank manager, a therapist, someone who sees what's happening and validates your reality. Someone who'll remind you that you're not crazy when they try to gaslight you. You need to use the tools available. Banks have fraud departments. Police have financial crimes units. There are lawyers who specialize in these cases. You don't have to fight alone, even when it feels like you do. And most importantly, you need to know that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting abuse. That family doesn't give anyone the right to destroy you. That blood isn't an excuse for betrayal. I spent 12 years believing that forgiveness was the highest virtue. That family came first no matter what. That I had to keep sacrificing, keep giving, keep staying, because that's what good people do. But I was wrong. Goodness isn't about martyring yourself for people who don't appreciate it. Goodness is about protecting yourself from people who would harm you. About building a life based on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. I rebuilt my life from nothing. I lost my home, my marriage, years of savings, and the person I'd been before all this happened. But I gained something more valuable. I gained myself back. Now I wake up in my small apartment and I make banana pudding whenever I want. I wear my cherry red housecoat not because I'm trying to feel alive, but because I am alive. I talk to my sister every evening because I want to, not because she's the only lifeline I have. I'm planning to move to that senior community I've been dreaming about, the one with activities and people my age who understand the cost of survival. I'm saving money for it in my own account, and nobody can take it from me. I'm building a life that's completely mine. No conditions, no costs, no one else's name attached to it. And when I look at myself in the mirror now, I recognize the woman looking back. She's older, she's tired, but she's here. She survived. And that's more than I thought I'd be able to say 3 years ago when I was sitting on that wooden deck sorting through bills I was afraid to open. So I'm asking you right now, whoever you are, wherever you are, have you lived this? Do you know someone who has? Are you making excuses for someone who takes more than they give? Are you signed away from your own protection? Are you being told that questioning someone's behavior means you're ungrateful, unforgiving, a bad daughter or wife or mother? Because if you are, you need to know that what you're feeling, that instinct that something is wrong, that voice in your head that says, this isn't normal, this isn't okay, that voice is right. Trust yourself. Document everything. Find your allies and get out. It won't be easy. It wasn't easy for me. There were days I wanted to give up, days I thought the fight wasn't worth it, days I wondered if I'd made everything worse by standing up for myself. But I'm here now, 3 years later, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that fighting back was worth it, that protecting myself was worth it, that choosing my own survival over someone else's comfort was worth it. You deserve a life that's yours. You deserve relationships based on respect, not control. You deserve to wake up in the morning without dread, without fear, without wondering what new way you'll be diminished today. And if no one else has told you this, let me be the one to say it. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're not vindictive or ungrateful or bad. You're someone who's been systematically abused by a person who knew exactly what they were doing. And recognizing that, naming it, fighting against it, that's not weakness. That's the bravest thing you could possibly do. So, if my story helps even one person see what I couldn't see for so long, if it helps even one person recognize the signs before it's too late, then sharing all of this, reliving all of this, was worth it. Hit that like button so this message reaches someone else who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss other stories like this, stories that might save someone's life. Because you're not alone in this. I wasn't alone. And together, we can make sure that the next person sitting where we sat, signing papers they don't understand, making excuses for inexcusable behavior, has someone telling them the truth. You deserve better. And better is possible. I'm living proof of that.